I walked into my sister's wedding completely alone, no because I lacked someone to bring, but because I needed to remember how it felt to stand unshielded. The venue in Savannah was stunning, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, but every glance felt like a judgment. Eyes scanned my black dress, my unadorned hands, the empty space beside me. A few of Rachel's new in-laws tilted their heads, whispering the way people do when they want to be overheard. There she is. The older one. Still single, right? It stung more than I let on. I've pitched to investors who thought I was too young, coded through nights no one saw, but this room full of polite smirks and curated smiles was a different battlefield. I could have turned around. But I didn't. Because this time, I wasn't here for them. I was here for me. Growing up in the Morgan household was like living on a stage I never auditioned for. From the moment she could speak in full sentences, Rachel was the one they chose to spotlight. Blonde, dimpled, always smiling on cue, had that effortless charm adults eat up like candy. At church picnics, relatives fawned over her braids while I stood nearby, holding a book, always the quiet one with too many questions and not enough softness. When I was 10, I dismantled our microwave just to see if I could make it reheat more evenly. I did. Mom grounded me anyway, furious that I had ruined a working appliance. Meanwhile, Rachel got a standing ovation at the school talent show for lip-syncing to a country pop song in glittery cowgirl boots. I clapped too, of course. That's what ghosts do observe. We applaud, but we don't take up space. My world was circuits, patterns, and possibilities. I read about machine learning before most kids knew how to spell algorithm. By 14, I had coded a self-timer oven so our dinners wouldn't burn when Mom forgot them. I even made her a manual. She never used it. She said it made her feel stupid. Our parents didn't discourage me, they just didn't know what to do with me. You'll grow out of this tech phase, my mom said once, after I skipped a school dance to attend a robotics camp. Then she grounded me again. I remember thinking how strange it was to be punished for wanting to build something while Rachel got gift cards for wearing a dress well. By high school, the gap between us was no longer subtle. Rachel dated football captains, I submitted research proposals. At family dinners, she was asked about prom and boyfriends, while I was met with vague nods and nervous glances when I brought up data ethics. Dad tried, in his own way. Once he asked, "So Claire, still doing your computer stuff?" It was well-meaning, it just didn't land. When Rachel got into college, there were banners, cupcakes, and a Facebook post with 200 likes. When I got a full scholarship to MIT, Mom said, "Wow, that's far." I was 17, and I learned how to pack light. I built my life in Seattle first, in co-working spaces and basement apartments, then in a glass-walled office of a company I created from scratch. I wasn't trying to win anyone's approval anymore. Not really. But there was always that part of me, small, quiet, buried deep, that wondered what it might feel like to be enough in their eyes. Meanwhile, Rachel's life unfolded like a Pinterest board. Engagements, weddings, housewarmings. Her first marriage ended within 2 years. The second lasted longer, until it didn't. Then came Ethan Whitmore, tall, monogrammed cufflinks, legacy trust fund, a name that rang bells in Southern social circles. Their engagement was splashed all over local magazines. My parents were elated. Rachel finally found the right man, they said. No one asked how I was doing. When the wedding invitation arrived, it came with a phone call from Mom. "Claire," she said, voice sweet but cautious, "please remember this is Rachel's day." "I'm aware," I replied. "And maybe, don't wear anything too sharp-looking. You know, no blazers or black suits. You're not giving a TED Talk." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll blend right in." Of course I wouldn't. I RSVP'd for one, not because I had no one to bring, but because I refused to treat this like a performance. I wasn't someone's plus one. I was enough on my own. On the flight to Georgia, I worked through revisions on a paper I was co-authoring with a Stanford lab. We were finalizing a neural mapping framework for early Alzheimer's detection, something I cared deeply about. I stared at the screen, watching code compile, but my mind kept drifting to the little girl with flashlight books and cardboard circuits who never made it into the family photo albums. When I landed in Savannah, I checked into a small inn just outside the city center. It smelled like cedar and old brick, nothing like the air-conditioned luxury of the Whitmore estate. The rehearsal dinner was already underway, but I hadn't been invited. No surprise there. I spent the evening walking the cobblestone streets, reminding myself I belonged to a world that didn't require sequins or surnames to matter. The next morning, I pulled on a simple black dress tailored. Minimal, no sparkle. I twisted my hair into a low knot and skipped makeup except for mascara. I looked like myself. Maybe that was the most radical thing I could do. And when I stepped into that ballroom, they saw me. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as a guest. As the unspoken disappointment they never managed to dress up. But I didn't flinch. Because ghosts don't flinch. And I wasn't here to haunt their fantasy. I was here to reclaim my space in the story. Rachel looked radiant. That's the word people used. Radiant. I heard it at least 6 times before I'd even found my seat. Rachel looks radiant, doesn't she? Oh, she's absolutely glowing. She's finally found her match. 3rd time's the charm. No one said it with malice. They didn't have to. Their compliments were weapons made of silk soft, but pointed. Every praise for Rachel came with an unspoken comparison. Claire is brilliant. Sure, but Rachel knows how to be loved. The ballroom looked like something out of a Southern bridal magazine. Ivory drapes, towering floral arches, a string quartet in one corner and champagne fountains in another. Everything glistened. Even the guests looked curated, matching tones, glossy hair. Families rehearsed to smile for the drone cameras flying overhead. I was seated near the back, of course. Not out of spite. I'm sure just logistics, or so my mother would claim. It's just easier to group people by side, she once told me at a previous wedding. You know, bride's family further back, so guests of honor can be closer. Translation: know your place. The Whitmores had claimed the front rows like they were born into them, which technically, they were. Ethan's parents had that kind of frozen elegance that comes from years of controlling rooms like this. His mother, Marilyn, looked like her face had made a deal with a surgeon. No movement in exchange for eternal superiority. She never looked at me directly, but I caught her glance once. She leaned into the woman beside her and said, "She's the sister, isn't she? The one who's always off? Working?" I smiled into my glass. "Yes, Marilyn. I am. The one who's working while you're busy perfecting duck confit for charity brunches. The one who files patents instead of nail shapes." Rachel stood beneath the flower arch with Ethan, the kind of couple that wedding planners build portfolios on. Her gown was white with delicate beadwork, long train, backless but tasteful. She knew exactly how to tilt her chin, how to smile without showing too much tooth, how to keep Ethan's hand on her lower back just enough to appear intimate but not possessive. I recognized the choreography. Rachel had always known how to perform love. Their vows were poetic and safe. His, about her kindness and laughter. Hers, about his strength and generosity. They didn't say anything real, but it sounded nice, which, for this crowd, was what mattered. I clapped on cue, of course. I even smiled when the flower girl, rumored to be a toddler model, flown in from Atlanta, tossed petals with practiced grace. It was perfect. Picture perfect. Painfully perfect. At the reception, I was placed between 2 distant cousins who still thought I worked in computers. "I figured you'd have someone by now," one said, twirling her martini pick. "A woman like you all accomplished." I nodded. Yes, that's what usually happens, right? Women get handed husbands the moment they hit revenue milestones. She blinked, unsure whether I was joking. I wasn't. Not entirely. Meanwhile, Rachel floated between tables like a trained dove, her gown catching candlelight, her voice pitched just right for toasts and side comments. I watched her laugh at a joke she'd heard a dozen times. I watched her lean into Ethan during photographs, hand on chest, like every rom-com poster you've ever seen. She wasn't pretending. Not really. Rachel believed in this image. She worked hard for it. I can't fault her for wanting something beautiful. I only ever faulted her for never asking what beauty cost the rest of us. Midway through the evening, she approached me. Her smile was tight, eyes scanning the room even as she spoke to me. Hey, just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay. I stared at her for a second. I'm fine. You seem, I don't know, distant. Rachel, I corrected, hearing myself default to her middle name like I always did when I was annoyed. We haven't had a real conversation in 5 years. She laughed. That soft, pleading kind of laugh. Well, you're here now. That counts. I almost asked her if she even knew what I did for a living, if she'd ever read a single article about the company I'd built. But what would be the point? She was already walking away, back into her world of twinkling lights and curated laughter. I stayed by the bar, sipping ginger ale because the champagne tasted like sugar and glitter. Then I heard it. Behind me, just close enough. She's pretty, someone said. But you can tell one of those women who marries her job. Probably expects applause for showing up alone. Another voice chuckled. Logan's cousins, I guessed. I didn't turn. Not right away. For a moment, I considered leaving. I knew exactly where I'd parked. My coat was draped over the back of my chair. No one would notice if I vanished before the first dance. But something held me. A pause in the music. A chair scraping back slow, deliberate. I turned. Douglas Whitmore was standing. No fanfare, no clinking of glasses, just a tall man in a navy suit, silver hair swept back, eyes sharp and unreadable. He moved past his family, past the couple of the night, past Marilyn. And he bowed. A full, clean, formal bow right there in the center of that glittering ballroom. And just like that, the perfect wedding cracked. Gasps moved through the room like a shiversoft at first, then more audible. A fork dropped somewhere near the cake table. The violinist trailed off mid-note. All eyes turned, not toward the bride or groom, but toward the man bowing in the middle of the ballroom. Douglas Whitmore didn't just nod. He bowed fully, deliberately, like he'd done it before in more formal settings, but never for someone like me. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his spine straight despite his age, and the gravity of his presence held the entire room hostage. I didn't move. I couldn't. Somewhere near the front, Marilyn looked like someone had knocked the air out of her. Rachel was frozen, hand still hovering near a flute of champagne. Ethan blinked, confused, trying to smile like this was all part of some pre-arranged toast. But it wasn't. Douglas straightened, then walked toward me with the calm assurance of someone used to reshaping rooms with nothing but intention. His suit wasn't flashy, just impeccably tailored. No gold cufflinks, no loud watch, no nonsense. He stopped in front of me, his voice low, steady, but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. Miss Morgan, he said. It's a privilege to finally meet you. I blinked. A dozen people shifted in their chairs. Some leaned forward. Your keynote at the Monterey Tech Summit, he continued, changed how our firm handles real-time AI deployment across 3 major subsidiaries. I owe you a thank you. Something inside me unclenched. He didn't say it like a performance. He said it like a correction. I offered the faintest smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. That's mutual. He didn't return to his seat. Instead, he turned to the nearest waiter and said calmly, "A club soda, please." Then back to me. "Would you mind walking with me for a moment?" I nodded. The whispers started before we reached the edge of the room. People reweighing me, recalibrating. The woman who had arrived alone? Suddenly, she wasn't an afterthought. She was someone Douglas Whitmore not only recognized but publicly respected. We stepped onto the venue's stone terrace. The air outside was cooler, cleaner. String lights flickered along the perimeter. The murmur of music continued behind us, muffled by the thick glass doors. I wasn't trying to make a scene, Douglas said. I know, I replied. You were trying to make a point. He smiled faintly. Some illusions deserve to be broken. I studied his posture, his expression. He didn't carry the same thin politeness the others wore, like perfume. He was sharp, alert. His silence felt deliberate, not dismissive. I meant what I said in there, he added. I recognized you the moment you walked in. Your firm's integration model for decentralized diagnostics changed our entire tech transition playbook. That wasn't public information, I said carefully. It wasn't, he agreed. But I make it my business to know who's actually changing the landscape behind the scenes. His words settled into the cracks I didn't realize were still open inside me. I had spent so long bracing against silence, against not being seen, that being seen with such clarity felt almost dangerous. I assume Ethan has no idea, I said. Douglas gave a short chuckle. Ethan can barely reset his Wi-Fi router. He inherited his access, Claire. You built yours. That line stopped me cold. He was right. I had built everything from pitch decks written on coffee-stained napkins to 3 a.m. code sprints on borrowed internet. I'd risked burnout, breakdowns, and bankruptcy sometimes all in the same quarter. I had built something people used, something real, but to my family, it had always felt invisible. Why say this now? I asked. Because they needed to hear it, he said, tilting his head toward the ballroom. And because you didn't come here expecting anyone to say it at all. That matters to me. We stood in silence for a moment. It was the first truly comfortable silence I'd had all day. Inside, the reception carried on barely. You could sense the shift. The energy had changed. Eyes flicked toward the terrace. People who had dismissed me were now watching, wondering. Marilyn looked like she was trying to swallow a lemon. Rachel's mouth was pressed into a thin, perfect line. When I stepped back into the room, a few guests stood not out of politeness, but uncertainty. What was the proper etiquette when the most powerful man in the room had just acknowledged the woman they'd been quietly ridiculing? I returned to my table and sat. Douglas sat beside me. No grand announcement, just presence. Rachel approached moments later, bouquet trembling in her grip. What was that about? She hissed through a clenched smile. I met her gaze calmly. That, I said, was someone recognizing what you never did. Her expression cracked, just a little. You couldn't let me have one day? She snapped. I almost laughed. One day? Rachel, you've had a lifetime. All I did was exist. She turned sharply, heels clicking as she stormed off, and for the first time ever, her exit didn't bruise me. It relieved me. When the speeches began, I stayed quiet. Douglas remained at my table, offering the occasional remark that flew over most guests' heads. Then Ethan's father stood to toast. To love, to legacy, he said. And to all the family who came tonight Eve, those who prefer the boardroom to the ballroom. There were chuckles. Until Douglas stood again. It takes very little talent to inherit wealth, he said, setting his drink down, and even less to marry into it. But the woman beside me, Claire Morgan's done neither. She's created value where there was none. She's earned respect in rooms most of you will never even enter. So if we're raising glasses, mine is to her. Silence. No one laughed now. No one whispered. They listened. I didn't smile. I didn't stand. I just kept my hand on the stem of my glass, gaze fixed forward. Because in that moment, I didn't need applause. I had something better. I had been understood. Back in the ballroom, the air felt thinner. It wasn't just me. Everyone had shifted. Chairs squeaked slightly as people sat straighter. Glasses were lifted more cautiously. The eyes that once looked through me now darted over, hesitant, calculating. You could almost hear it, the mental backpedaling. That's her? She's someone? A few guests tried to recover by offering sudden, syrupy smiles as I passed on the way back from the restroom. One woman even touched my arm and said, I had no idea you were the Claire Morgan. I just nodded. They didn't really know. And truthfully, they never cared to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was just done. Gloria Ethan's mother looked like she was rethinking the seating chart with each passing second. A man from Ethan's firm approached with his wife, offered a business card with a hint of sweat on his brow, saying, "We've actually been following your work on neural architecture, brilliant stuff." His wife nodded too eagerly, clearly unsure what neural architecture even was. "Thanks," I said, slipping the card into my clutch without looking at it. "We're not taking on partnerships right now." He blinked, then nodded, then left. Rachel sat still for most of the reception after that. She smiled for photos, laughed at jokes, but her movements were stiff, too rehearsed. From where I sat, I could see her watching me in intervals, quick glances, eyes narrowing, then softening, then tightening again. She looked less like a bride, and more like a woman trying to hold on to the one story she thought she controlled. That used to bother me. Her quiet erasure of my life, her refusal to ask, her turning every family gathering into a parade of curated updates that had room for every except me. But tonight, it didn't sting. Because I finally understood something. Recognition is only priceless if you've spent your life needing it. And I didn't. Not anymore. I had built my company with no press, no family bragging rights. My parents never posted my graduation photo. My mother had never asked for a tour of my office. My father once asked if AI was like that robot from that Will Smith movie. For years I wanted them to care. I wanted my mother to beam about me the way she did about Rachel's new car or kitchen backsplash. But somewhere between my first failed startup and my third sleepless product launch, I stopped needing it. And now that it was finally being offered publicly, visibly it felt like an afterthought. My mother approached just after dessert. She moved like someone crossing thin ices, low, unsure. "You look beautiful tonight," she said gently. I nodded. "Thank you." "We didn't know about Monterey," she added after a pause. "Or Mr. Whitmore. Or any of that." "I know." She looked at me carefully. "We're proud of you, Claire." I met her gaze fully this time. "Why now?" She blinked. "Excuse me? Why are you proud now? Because someone powerful said I matter, or because you finally believe I do?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't come here for that," I continued. "Not for approval, not even for peace. I came because I no longer need either." She reached for my hand gently. I let her hold it for a second. Then I let go. Across the room, Rachel watched it all from her seat. Our eyes met for a moment, just a moment, and in that brief exchange, I saw something I hadn't seen in her in years. Doubt. Not about me. About herself. Because for the first time, she realized she hadn't won anything. She had just performed better in a play I was never interested in auditioning for. A few minutes later, she caught up to me near the exit. "I didn't know he knew you," she said quietly. "Uncle Douglas." "You never asked," I replied. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's just true." She looked away. "You always made me feel like I wasn't enough." And there it was. The twist. I tilted my head. "Funny. You and Mom always made me feel like I was too much." We both stood there, holding the shattered remains of roles we had tried too hard to play. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was real. I left soon after, no big goodbye, no dramatic exit, just slipped out into the cool Georgia night, keys in hand, heels clicking softly across the stone steps. And not a single person laughed. I didn't go back inside. Let them dance. Let them toast and clink glasses and post filtered photos with captions like Whitmore Wedding or Southern Elegance. Let them tell stories about the night Uncle Douglas did something strange because they would call it strange. Polite society always does when truth shows up uninvited. I stood outside, beneath the soft flicker of fairy lights and the darkening Georgia sky. The air smelled like hydrangeas and cigar smoke. For once, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like the one who had left the stage before the show turned tacky. A few guests passed me on their way to the valet. Some nodded, too polite, too performative. One man, a junior executive from a firm I'd quietly acquired 3 years ago, approached with awkward reverence. "I didn't know you were that Claire Morgan," he said. I looked at him evenly. "You still don't." He chuckled nervously, then walked off with his wife, muttering an apology. I didn't respond. I wasn't being cruel. I just didn't owe him clarity. A few minutes later, Douglas appeared beside me, hands in his coat pockets, tie loosened. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, eyes focused on nothing in particular. The silence between us was clean, comfortable. I wasn't trying to make a scene, he said finally. I know. You were trying to make a correction, I added. He smiled. Exactly. We stood like that for a while, people who had played entirely different games most of our lives, and somehow ended up in the same quiet truth. I wondered how many rooms Douglas had once been erased from. How many times he'd chosen to see through performance instead of clapping for it. I have an offer, he said after a moment. Not a favor, not charity, a real offer. I looked at him. I'm launching a new initiative. Data infrastructure for public health systems, starting with regional hospitals in underfunded districts. We need vision, clarity, someone who knows how to build from nothing. He paused, then added, we need someone who doesn't care if her name is in gold letters on the wall. He turned to me. I want your insight, your leadership, your name on the founding charter. The words didn't jolt me. They landed like something inevitable, like water finally meeting its level. I didn't answer right away. Not because I needed to play coy. Not because I was overwhelmed. But because for the first time in a long time, I realized I had a choice. A real one. Not born from resentment or thirst for validation, but from clarity. From self-respect. I'll need time, I said. Take it, he replied. He didn't press further. No urgency. Just trust. The rare kind. He walked away with a simple nod. No fanfare, no handshake, just mutual understanding sealed in quiet. I drove back to my inn with the windows cracked. The wind was cold against my face, but I welcomed it. I didn't play music. I didn't need to drown out the noise, because for the first time, the noise was gone. I wasn't thinking about the applause I didn't get as a child, or the empty chairs at my product launches. I wasn't thinking about the dinners where no one asked about my work, or the holidays when Rachel's newest milestone always swallowed the room. I was thinking about the freedom that comes from not needing to be applauded. I used to wonder what it would feel like to be acknowledged, seen, celebrated by my family. I dreamed of hearing my name in a proud tone from my mother's mouth. Of my father saying, "That's my daughter," with something other than surprise. But now I knew the truth. Their approval was never the prize. What mattered was that I had built a life that didn't require their permission to matter. I had failed, succeeded, been lonely, been powerful, and all of it counted, even when no one clapped. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. Emails blinked, investor inquiries, partnership requests, a news article about the Whitmore wedding already going viral. I closed them all. Instead, I opened a blank document and began writing something new. Not a pitch deck, not a press release, but a blueprint for something that mattered. Not for them, not for the applause, but for me. I used to think strength meant not needing anyone. Late nights in rented office spaces, ramen noodles balanced beside my keyboard, code running through my brain even in my sleep. That was the grind they romanticize in startup culture. Except, no one wrote blog posts about what it feels like when your prototype fails the night before a pitch round. Or when your co-founder quits, and you can't make payroll and your landlord starts calling your cell. There were nights I stared at my reflection in a dark window, wondering if I was building something or just too stubborn to stop. Those years didn't make it into family conversations. While Rachel posted engagement photos or links to her latest interior design mood boards, I was teaching myself how to write machine learning models with open source libraries and a YouTube education. I had no mentor, no funding, just a whiteboard in a borrowed basement office, and the quiet knowledge that no one was coming to rescue me. When people saw me today poised, successful, keynote speaker, Claire Morgan, they didn't see the version of me that once called 12 investors in one day and was turned down by all of them. They didn't see the version that spent her birthday debugging a server failure while eating cold Thai food alone in a co-working lounge that locked at midnight. They didn't see the one who cried in the stairwell because her launch failed after 18 months of work. And my family? They never asked. Never once. Not when I moved out at 19 and skipped Thanksgiving to stay in Boston for finals. Not when I launched my first product. Not when my name quietly showed up in a startup journal someone probably forwarded to them without context. They saw my independence as proof that I didn't need to be checked on. But that's not what independence is. Independence isn't absence of need. It's the willingness to keep walking, even when no one offers you a ride. And I had walked a long, long way. I remembered one night in particular, December of my second year building the company. My heater had broken. I was sleeping on a couch in my office, 2 pairs of socks on, typing through frozen fingers. I had exactly $437 left in my bank account. My laptop was overheating, and I had 3 rejections sitting in my inbox. I wanted to give up. I almost did. Then I looked up and saw a sticky note I had taped to the wall months earlier. One word, in block letters. Proof. Proof that I existed. Proof that I could outlast the silence. Proof that I could make something real whether or not anyone clapped. I kept going. Not because I was brave. Because I was tired of being invisible. The next few years blurred. Beta launches, demo days, contracts, lawsuits. A quiet acquisition offer. I turned down just to see if I could build something better. No one called to celebrate. No one called at all. It used to hurt. The quiet from people who were supposed to love me. But now I realize, they weren't withholding love. They just never learned how to see me outside their reflection of who I should have been. And that wasn't my fault. That wasn't my weight to carry. Their discomfort with my strength? Their silence when I succeeded? Their suspicion when I didn't fold under pressure? Not mine. All that weight I dragged behind me for years, the hope they'd someday say, "We're proud of you," the ache of not being seen at the dinner table, the fantasy of being someone they'd brag about instead of explain away. I set it down. Because none of them carried it. I did. And still, somehow, I didn't break. So now, when someone like Douglas Whitmore says my name with clarity and respect, it's not validation. It's acknowledgement. It's recognition of a truth that always existed, even when no one else wanted to see it. And the truth is, I didn't get here because someone opened the door. I built the damn door myself. I made the hinges. I carved the key. And I walked through. Alone, but never empty. I didn't expect her to come after me. The party was still going strong behind those tall glass door slaughter, music, the clinking of expensive stemware, but then I heard it, the careful, almost tentative click of heels on stone. My mother. She didn't call out my name. Just walked slowly toward me like someone approaching a wild animal they weren't sure would let them close. "Claire," she said softly. I turned, not out of anger, just curiosity. She looked smaller in the moonlight, older, as if all the years she spent sculpting control into every gathering, every photo, every family moment had finally cracked a little. "You look beautiful tonight," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." A pause. "We didn't know," she added. "About Monterey, about Mr. Whitmore, about all that work you've been doing." I waited. She fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. "We're proud of you," she said finally, like it was a confession she had rehearsed. And for a moment, a single, flickering moment, I felt something almost like longing try to crawl back into me, but it didn't stick. Because the question came out before I could stop it. "Why now?" She blinked. "What? Why are you proud now?" I repeated. "Because someone powerful said I matter, because you finally believe I do?" She didn't answer. She just reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her grip was tentative, light, as if she expected I might pull away. I didn't nod immediately. But I also didn't squeeze back. I let her hold it for a second. Then I let go. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, like she was searching for the right sentence to undo 30 years of silence. But there are no words for that. Not really. and I was done translating my pain into a language she'd understand. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need regret. What I needed, what I had always needed, was for someone to see me when no one else was watching. But that window had closed. She meant well. I believe that now. Maybe she always did. Maybe she thought she was protecting me by ignoring the parts of me that scared her. Maybe ambition, solitude, resilience, all the things she never understood looked too much like defiance. But that was never what it was. I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to become. And she missed it. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know how to care for someone who didn't fit the frame she hung above the fireplace. "I'm happy for Rachel," I said finally. My mother looked confused. She got the life she wanted, and she worked for it in her own way. She nodded slowly. She always needed a lot, and I never asked for much, I added. Maybe that's why no one thought to offer anything. Her shoulders dropped. A sigh. Maybe guilt, maybe just fatigue. "I wish we'd done better," she whispered. "I wish you had too." She didn't flinch at that. Maybe she expected it. "Claire?" Her voice was quiet now, barely holding together. "Do you hate us?" I looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "I stopped expecting you to be different. That's not the same as hate, that's peace." She bit her lip. "I just don't need what you're offering anymore," I added. "Not because it's too late, but because I've already given it to myself." She blinked, eyes shining, but no tears fell. She was too practiced for that. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I am," I replied. "And it has nothing to do with this night." She nodded, then turned back toward the ballroom without another word. I watched her walk away, not out of sorrow or satisfaction, but something quieter finality. That was our last real conversation. The next day, I'd board a plane back to Seattle. A new term sheet would be waiting in my inbox, my team would be prepping for a product launch, and Douglas would send the first draft of our charter, inviting me to reshape something that actually mattered. The world would keep turning. But I wouldn't carry that hunger anymore, the aching need for someone to finally say, "I see you," because I already had. And I'd never let myself become invisible again. Not for love. Not for approval. Not even for family. I didn't say goodbye. Not to Rachel, not to Ethan, not to any of the people who had finally started looking at me like I was someone worth knowing. That's the thing about recognition, it feels hollow when it comes from people who once looked past you, not because you changed, but because someone told them you mattered. So I slipped away quietly, as the music swelled into another round of choreographed joy. The night had settled into that golden phase, where everything glittered just enough to distract from its own emptiness. Polished speeches, practiced laughter, one more toast to forever, while the servers reset champagne flutes and someone's kid cried softly beneath the dessert table. I didn't want to be there when the sparklers came out. When the guests lined up for photos they'd forget by morning. When the Whitmore name would be hashtagged next to Rachel's smile, the same way it had been etched into monogrammed napkins and printed onto menus that would end up in the trash. I didn't want to perform gratitude. I just wanted to leave. So I walked past the valet, down the gravel path lit by hanging lanterns, heels in hand, cool stone underfoot. My rental car waited at the edge of the lot, quiet, unassuming. No one followed. No one noticed. And that, for the first time in my life, felt like freedom. Because I wasn't leaving in shame. I wasn't walking out because I'd been excluded. I was walking out because I finally realized I didn't belong in a story that needed me small to make others feel big. So I wrote myself out. No confrontation. No dramatic closure. Just the silent grace of a woman reclaiming her own time. I drove through the sleepy streets of Savannah, the windows cracked, letting the southern air wrap around me like silk. I passed magnolia trees and brick sidewalks, candlelit porches and laughter spilling from backyard patios. And I thought about how long I'd stayed in places that made me feel like a footnote. How often I had shrunk myself to fit the frame someone else had designed. All those years of trying not to make things uncomfortable, trying not to shine too brightly in rooms that only welcomed softness, trying not to be too much. And yet, still never being enough. But not anymore. Not after tonight. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a victory lap. It was something quieter, deeper. Like breathing after holding it too long. There was no one in the passenger seat. No one waiting at home with flowers or congratulations. But I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for someone to walk beside me just to prove I was worth the journey. I was already moving. Already building. Already becoming. No applause. Just motion. And maybe that's what healing really is, not the moment they finally say your name out loud, but the moment you realize you don't need them to anymore. Seattle welcomed me back with soft rain and overcast skies home. In its own melancholic, comforting way, the city didn't ask questions. It didn't blink when I walked through my apartment door, still wearing the same black dress I'd worn to the wedding. It simply existed, like it always had, letting me slip back into my life like I'd never left. I made tea. Not because I needed it, but because I needed a ritual. As the kettle warmed, I scrolled past a dozen new emails. Messages from people who had been at the wedding, strangers now suddenly so inspired by your work. Others offering potential synergies and possible collaborations. A few press inquiries from tech media, wondering what it was. Like to be publicly endorsed by Douglas Whitmore. I deleted them all. That night had never been about them. I didn't want to ride a wave of belated recognition. I wanted to build something from stillness, from no reaction. Douglas's charter proposal was waiting in my inbox, just as he said it would be. A clean document, no strings, just vision and infrastructure and my name at the top, where it belonged. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook, one I'd bought months ago but hadn't dared touch because part of me still believed I needed to arrive somewhere first. That night proved I already had. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Build without apology." It wasn't a mission statement. It was a promise. 1 week later, I walked into my office, glass windows, concrete floors, the quiet hum of servers behind the wall. My team was already there, heads bent over screens, coffee in hand, earbuds in. They looked up when I walked in, not with fanfare, but with familiarity. A few smiled. One of them said, "Welcome back, boss." Boss. Not sister of the bride. Not the one who came alone. Just boss. I moved through the room, nodding at progress reports and prototypes and models still in testing. My lead engineer flagged me down. "That nonprofit hospital project you mentioned last month? We did a rough analysis. It's viable." I smiled. "Good. We're going to make it more than viable." And I meant it. Because for once, I wasn't building to prove anyone wrong. I was building because I finally understood what it meant to be right with myself. I still hadn't called my mother. There was nothing left to say. Rachel sent a text once. No apology, just, "I hope we can talk soon, maybe get coffee when you're back in town." I read it twice, then set my phone down. Some bridges don't need burning. Some just quietly collapse from years of imbalance. And some, you simply walk away from because you've learned that your peace is worth more than proximity. A few days later, Douglas and I met again, this time in a sunlit conference room overlooking Lake Washington. We talked numbers, but mostly we talked about people, about systems that deserved rebuilding, about work that had meaning beyond margin. "I'm not here to be anyone's figurehead," I told him. "I didn't ask for one," he said. We shook hands. No fanfare, no press release, just mutual clarity. Afterward, I walked down to the pier, sat with my shoes off and my feet dangling over the water. The sky was the color of graphite, the wind cool but not cruel. And for the first time in years, I exhaled without bracing for disappointment. This was not the life they had imagined for me. But it was the life I chose. Not the wedding photos, not the baby showers, not the country club smiles, but clarity, purpose, a quiet kind of power that didn't need to be displayed to be real. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a room full of people standing because someone told them to. What I needed, what I had always needed, was this: a life I could live in full voice, without shrinking, without asking permission, without waiting for someone to say, "Now you matter," because I had already said it to myself. And finally, that was enough.